Welcome. Today we need to look at the first of a two-part series on the French Revolution. This event, this massive event, which took place only in Spain, had repercussions across Europe and across the world. We are still dealing today with kind of the reverberations of what happened in the French Revolution, not so much in terms of the direct effect, but the ideological effect and the inspiration effect that it will have for coming generations, even 2 centuries down the line. But what we need to do today is look at 1789 specifically, look at the year it started to try and discuss why it started. Now, many people will talk about the French Revolution as an enlightened revolution, right? This fulfillment of Enlightenment values and ideas, and frankly it is. Or at least in my humble opinion / argument, it is. But we can cover that in the book, and while you're thinking about that, I want you to try and figure out, how do ideas go from concepts that philosophers are thinking about, grumblings that individuals have, to an actual revolution that overthrows the government and puts forth an entirely new societal, political, economic, cultural system. Because that's what happened. So let's look at that today. And what we need to look at is 3 different movements all happening simultaneously. One we will refer to as what's happening in the National Assembly. The second is kind of the rural uprising, if you will, the rebellions in the countryside. And the third is urban unrest in Paris itself. Because it's only because these 3 are happening at the same time that we really see these ideologies, these ideas that people are putting forth, coming to fruition in a real, actual event. But without further ado, we need our baseline here. This is Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette. Yes, I chose the Barbie version of her for reasons you may understand. We have to understand these people are kind of rich and spoiled, and unlike Louis XIII and Louis XIV, who had to find their position, who had to actually create this absolute monarchy, these 2 were born to it. They were born to it for generations. Louis XIV is his great-great-great-great-grandfather. And he never had to work for it. He just assumed everybody would pay attention to what he said. Well, the problem is, in the 18th century, 17th and 18th century, in this time that has expired since Louis XIV, a lot has changed. The way of people are thinking has changed. More importantly, we talked about Louis XIV and Versailles. If not, go back and look at that. What required an absolute monarch to maintain that image of an absolute monarch and fight wars to kind of secure that ideal cost an insane amount of money. France had also been involved in 5 different wars in the past century with England, including the American Revolution. And frankly, they were bankrupt. As a matter of fact, 50% of the entire income of the government, meaning 50% of the entire income that goes to the federal government, was just going to paying the interest. That's it. Just paying the interest on the money they owed. They owed that much money. They were so far in debt, the government could barely function or run, and yet these 2 are living lavishly. Marie Antoinette herself built a little milkmaid kind of cabin and went and lived there because she said, I want to be like the common people. And that she had handmade clothes and people to milk her cows and people to cater on her while she was living in this milkmaid cabin that was much nicer than any milkmaid ever had in history. But, moving on. So we have this massive debt. We have people that are out of touch. And having to deal with this massive debt, having to deal with the problems, Louis XVI calls together something that had not existed in a very long time. It was called the Estates General. You can think of it as kind of the Parliament of France. But it worked differently. the Estates General was made up of three different groups. Parliament is made up of House of Lords and House of Commons. This is made up of the representatives of the three estates. The estates being the clergy, being the nobility, and being the everybody else, right? Be them lawyers and bankers to peasants in the field. Well, they all had equal representation. The issue we run into is things have changed. Over the past 150 years, some of these third estate have actually become the wealthiest people. They don't have the position, they don't own the land, but they're merchants, and they have become extremely wealthy people. And we'll see the clergy and the nobility together comprise about 300,000 people, but everybody else is about 23 million, or somewhere around there. And yet, those first two little groups have twice the voting power of the third estate. More importantly, the last time the Estates General met was 1614. That was 165 years before, which means nobody was alive the last time they met. Nobody was alive the last time this group was together, so nobody knew how to do it. So all of a sudden they have to come together, they have to figure out who's going to be the representatives, because they don't remember how it happened last time. They don't even know how the meeting's supposed to kind of transpire, and they all come together. Now, the third estate, the third estate will get more representative. There will be 300 clergy members, 300 nobility, and 600 from the third estate in 1789. The problem is, the clergy and the nobility can still outvote the third estate. And they do. On every single vote, they outvote the third estate. Well, the third estate, these people, these 600 people, are just fed up. They can't get anything they want. They can't get anything done. They literally stand up out of this room and they walk out as a protest. The clergy and nobility post guards and won't let them back in because they walked out. Not knowing what else to do, these group of 600 people went to the tennis courts. This is at Versailles, understand. They went to the tennis courts. This is an image of the tennis courts. And they held their meeting there. They declare they are a new group. They declare themselves the National Assembly. And they take something called the Tennis Court Oath, where they pledge two things. One, they pledge that they are going to draft a new constitution. They're going to write a new constitution. You see the Enlightenment influence here, right? And two, they are not going to adjourn until they've written it and instated the system. Now that's important because when you're writing these things, and you got 600 people arguing over them, you can imagine if you all go away, maybe you're not coming back again. Maybe you'll lose momentum. So they're saying they will stay there, they will continue beating in the tennis court until it's happening. So now you essentially have three governments. You have the king, you have the clergy and nobility meeting in the Estates General, and you have this National Assembly. And by the way, this National Assembly has no actual authority. In fact, it would be a bunch of people screaming and writing something that no one would care about. Except, at that same time, we have to understand that there was a series of famines in 1788 and 89. And people in the countryside were starving. In fact, there was a series of massive things called bread riots, where commoners would break into a bakery, steal all the bread, and then sell it to each other at a just price. Not the price that the market is saying because of shortages, think demand and supply, but the price that they thought was fair. Please understand this is well below the actual price. And they thought if you break into a bakery, steal the bread, but then don't eat it yourself, but then you sell it to a friend for a just price, and you buy it from your friend for a just price, then you're not stealing it, and it's legal, and it's just. Don't try and figure out the logic. This is what's happening. Well, so this is happening all over. Chaos in the countryside. But at the same time, there's still taxes being collected. And these peasants in the countryside, actually the commoners in the countryside of all types, start getting upset. They can't pay their taxes, they can't meet their requirements, and they end up breaking into courthouses and setting them on fire or destroying the records. The idea is very simple, right? If you destroy all the court records, nobody knows who owns what or who pays what taxes, and you can't collect taxes if you don't know who, where, when, how, right? And this is going on in the countryside all over France. This is happening. You have these bread riots. You have these rallies going on, and people are screaming out new phrases of liberty, equality, fraternity. Right? Liberty, equality, fraternity. These concepts that you might come out of the Enlightenment. Same time this is happening in Paris. If you think the people in the countryside don't have bread, imagine what's going to happen in the urban areas. Now they have more money in the urban areas, so more bread is taken in, but it's being taken by the wealthy. The common workers, the poor workers who go to the market every morning to get bread, go and there's no available bread. Now, who goes and gets bread? Well, it's the women of the household usually, not always. Please understand the women are working at this time, but you have these masses of women at these markets. They can't get bread. They start getting upset. They start screaming. They start riling. They start protesting. And these are happening in these markets, these market squares all over Paris. What we find is, and we're just still digging into some of this information, that some of these women are getting extremely violent. And they're protesting very heavily. Now, the king, again, he's out at Versailles, 11 miles away from the city, doesn't care. But at one point, on one fateful day, July 1st, 1789, these housewives, these women who are trying to get bread for their kids, start a protest in this giant rally. Men come out and start seeing this, and they join, and soon it's men, women, it's everybody. It's a lot of artisans. It's this entire huge protest, July 1st, 1789. And July 14th, 1789. And they will start marching. And they march to a place called the Bastille. And the Bastille is an old prison. It's a in the past, note the past, was a political prison. At the time, there are 7 people there. None of them are actually political prisoners, and one of them is a wealthy aristocrat who's been imprisoned for writing pornography. But it doesn't matter. There's no guns there. There's no political prisoners there. But they attack it anyways, and many of them know it. They attack it anyways. They attack the Bastille. They free the prisoners. They take a handful of guns because that's all that's there. And it's a ridiculous scene. It doesn't really make sense. But the symbolism is there. They have just taken down this symbol of the king's power, this symbol of the king's oppression, this symbol of that the people are responsive to the government instead of the government being responsive to the people. Now, do these commoners understand the uppity and intellectual concepts of the Enlightenment? No, but they do understand we want ours. And they are making that movement. So, now imagine what you have, right? Let's go back. You have Paris in chaos with prisons being attacked and market squares in protest. You have women rioting at every point demanding bread. You have these bread riots in the countryside and people in the countryside attacking what we would call courthouses. You have this group of individuals, intellectual individuals of the Third Estate, meeting in the Tennis Court at Versailles. The nobles all have to return home to actually protect their interest in the countryside, to try and calm that chaos in the countryside. Nobody's going to Paris because they're all too scared to go into Paris. The clergy have to go home to help protect and help people who are suffering in the countryside. The king is hiding because he's scared of what's happening with all this chaos. And all of a sudden, the only people left to run the government are these 600 people sitting in a tennis court. And they will declare themselves the new government. They will write a constitution and a declaration of rights of man which reforms the government. And they will seize control and force the king to become a constitutional monarch. It seems odd, but that's what happened. That you have chaos everywhere, people fleeing, and in that chaos, 600 people meeting in a tennis court are the only people left around still standing around the government. So they do. And in the process, they theoretically take down one of the greatest absolute monarchies that has ever existed. But there's more to the story than this, because that's the first year of the French Revolution. We'll touch on that soon.